with the numbers. So thank you very much for joining us in our fifth webinar in our Building Marketplaces in Challenging Times series. The objective of running this panel session today is to really look at not only the impact of the coronavirus on the various markets, but really more importantly, what has changed? Is it a fundamental change? And therefore, what opportunities does that create for marketplaces, for real estate agencies, for the industry into the future? That's sort of the broad context of what we're talking about. Before I go any further, I've got to thank sponsors. We have some sponsors, so without them, life would be a lot harder. So a big thank you to iVox, the call tracking people based out of the UK and Nevada. So thank you very much to Ryan and his team.
The current state of the world has flipped business upside down. There has been an enormous increase in online traffic, with people saying they plan not to go back to shops when they reopen. Getting the online experience right has never been more important. But are you relying on false positives to evaluate the recovery of your business? There's a big difference between bored browsers spending time on your site and motivated buyers. But how can you tell the difference? The phone call tells the story. At iVox, we focus on the data that matters most.
And also to the guys at Fortumo out of Estonia, who do mobile payments and working with marketplaces around the world. I want to introduce three fantastic guys who joined us today. So thank you very much to Malcolm Myers, who's the CEO of European Internet Ventures. And Malcolm, I'll get you to talk a bit about what you guys do in a second. I've got Brian Boero from 1000 Watt Consulting out in California. So thank you very much for joining us today, Brian, bright and early. And Mostyn Goodwin from OC&C Strategy Group, I think in London at the moment, if I'm not correct, or in the United Kingdom at least. So thank you very much for joining today, and hopefully it's going to be a very fantastic conversation. We did this session about 12 hours ago with three operators: Georg Schmiel, who comes out of GUI IQI, Brennan, who runs Fazwaz, which is a end-to-end technology-driven broker out of Thailand, and Sean Di Gregorio, who runs Frontier Digital Ventures. We had a very good conversation, which went well over an hour. So we were chatting well into the middle of the night for me and the middle of the day for them. So without any more introduction, I'd love it if, Malcolm, you could give us a bit of an overview of what European Internet Ventures does.
Thank you, Simon. Well, we are M&A and capital raisers, but we're very special in the sense that I've spent more than 12 years exclusively in the marketplaces space, working with a lot of verticals and horizontals in every continent of the world, and both startups and the larger ones which private equity spend their time buying. So that's what we do. We help companies raise money and buy and sell classifieds and marketplaces.
Okay. Excellent. Now, Brian, do you want to tell us a bit about 1000 Watt Consulting?
Yeah, 1000 Watt is a strategy and creative agency that is focused on the real estate industry, and we help real estate agencies, real estate brands, prop tech companies, property portals, figure out how to present themselves to the world, communicate their story, position their products, and build their brands.
And Mostyn, what does OC&C do?
We sort of similar to Malcolm, where he works on fundraising for companies. We tend to work on the commercial advice that fits around classifieds and marketplace deals around the world. it's probably about half of what we do, working on big deals in the space, and the other half is working with corporates, so businesses in the space, helping them think about growth and business plans for the future. That's probably a fair chunk of what OC&C does in this space. So,
okay, fantastic. So, okay, well, thank you. So where I'd like to sort of kick the conversation off is really just a sort of a temperature check on the markets that you guys are looking at. You know, what's happening, what's the impact of the coronavirus, what's really happened to the marketplaces and portals, are the traffic down, is the traffic coming back again? And then we'll start to get into, well, what are people really starting to do differently? Brian, let's start in the US, because we hear a lot of news about, you know, the US and just the ever-growing impact of the coronavirus is having on the whole country. How does that translate into what's happening in the real estate industry and also to the portals operating there?
Yes, well, a lot has happened in a very short period of time. And what happened during the course of April, when we were sort of at the bottom of this crisis thus far, is real estate transactions dropped off anywhere from 30 to 80% across markets. That obviously had a major impact not only on real estate agents and real estate agencies, but also the portals. The portals immediately started discounting their rates, basically giving their advertisers a break of anywhere from 20 to 30%. I'm speaking here specifically of Realtor.com and Zillow. Also notable was that beginning in early April, all of the companies that have begun in the last 2 years to do what is called iBuying here, buying homes and then selling homes, for example, Zillow or Open Door, those companies basically stopped operations. They stopped buying homes. Redfin is another one. Those companies have since resumed in certain markets buying homes. So from that bottom in April, we're now seeing traffic go back up, demand for housing go back up. In many cases, transaction volume and new listings is comparable to what it was at this point last year. So we've seen this very roller coaster-like effect over the last 90 days of hitting a bottom in April, starting to climb out. The question is whether or not that is sustainable or we're headed for yet another dip, and that remains to be seen. But the housing market in the US has proven to be resilient, I think is an understatement.
Okay. And Mostyn, what from the companies that you're working with, what's been the impact on their businesses?
I think probably quite similar. So we've been looking at this quite a lot in recruitment, auto and real estate. There was the sort of March, April, May, June period when I think kind of similar to the US, we saw inventory probably down between 30 and 40% depending on sector. Recruitment probably even worse, up to 50% sometimes. I think our hope is in some categories, so general goods wasn't as bad, so some of the second-hand goods markets that people talk about wasn't as bad, recruitment was worse. We've seen evidence that some inventory is coming back, but it's very country specific. So we touched earlier in the build-up about the UK being sort of worse than some of Europe, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Nordics being better with the exception of Sweden. So some of those countries have turned the corner already, seeing volumes come back. Some of the countries worse hit, like the UK, are still sort of scraping along the bottom. And I guess our slightly negative view of the rest of the year, that if GDP is down 5% in most countries for the year, that's going to suppress the jobs market, the housing market, and the auto market. So at a macro level, we're probably expecting 2020 and 21 to be below 19 for the underlying markets, which means it's going to be a tough trading environment for lots of our clients. So not disastrous like now, but still subdued probably compared to 19 would be our base case.
So Malcolm, from what you're seeing, do you think we're sort of got through the first rough patch, which is the initial shock of lockdown? There's a strong correlation between people locking down, transactions not being able to be completed or even started in many cases because you can't engage with a car dealer or you couldn't engage with a real estate agent. Traffic dropped, leads dropped. They're coming back as lockdown loosens up. But as Mostyn was talking about there, do you think there's this, now is the next wave coming, but it's more economically driven as countries get hit with GDP decreases?
It's a great question. I think we need to make distinctions between what's going at the portal level in terms of traffic and listings. And by the way, a lot of those listings have not been generating money for the past month or two, since a lot of platforms have decided to discount or to give away listings for free. So we need to make a distinction between traffic and listings, which generally have bounced back quite nicely in many of the markets we've been looking at and many of the verticals, to actually seeing transactions happening. And I think we're now at that sort of rather benign period where we're seeing a bounce back in some of the leading indicators, but we don't have the proof points yet in terms of actually seeing car sales volumes or apartment rentals or apartment sales volumes or job numbers being given to us.
Okay, which makes a lot of sense. Actually, I just want to show you a video quickly from iVox, because it's quite interesting. They talk about that traffic is coming back, but is it actually convertible traffic? And how some companies are very much saying, just because you're getting the visits back doesn't mean all is actually rosy. So let me quickly show you this short video that they've put together.
The current state of the world has flipped business upside down. There has been an enormous increase in online traffic, with people saying they plan not to go back to shops when they reopen. Getting the online experience right has never been more important. But are you relying on false positives to evaluate the recovery of your business? There's a big difference between bored browsers spending time on your site and motivated buyers. But how can you tell the difference? The phone call tells the story. At iVox, we focus on the data that matters most.
So while that's clearly coming from the perspective of calls as a very good indicator, because the tire kickers out there are not going to start making telephone calls to talk to real estate agents or talk to car dealers for the fun of it. What was interesting is when I had a good chat with Ryan Gallagher, the CEO of iVox, he said a lot of his clients are starting to see that although the traffic numbers are coming back, it's what the CEOs are now truly measuring is call volume, because that's what they can then relate to actual true leads being generated. That's one example of how things have changed. What else has changed in how marketplaces are operating and what they're actually offering their customers, the agents, the developers, the car dealers, etc.? Brian, why don't we start with you? What are you seeing as sort of innovation that's occurring in your part of the world?
Well, and this trend began about a year ago or more, and is proven to be, I think, prescient given the times. And that is that property portals here in the United States began moving from simply what you might call a lead model to more of a referral model, meaning Realtor.com and Zillow and Trulia, up to this point, basically, took advertising fees and they would distribute leads. Zillow launched a program last year, as did Realtor.com, where they were charging and now charge no upfront fee, but charge a fee on the back end, a referral fee of 30%. And before that referral goes out, those leads are touched and warmed up, so to speak, by an internal portal employee before it is sent to the agent partner. So that qualification has, even before this crisis, served to funnel a greater number of closable referrals or leads to a smaller number of advertisers. So that move, which began over a year ago, I think is accelerating now.
Okay, so lead qualification is becoming far more important. Do you see the same, Malcolm, in your travels?
So I would dwell on a few. Yes, of course, I agree that lead qualification has been seen by portals as a way of getting more money, whether they're charging on a pay-per-lead basis or more of a commission basis. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think some of the more immediate things which have happened is clearly at last, a lot of intermediaries have suddenly decided that becoming more of an online business themselves sort of makes far more sense now. And I think clearly lockdown and social distancing has suddenly been a trigger, and I'm talking both on car and real estate, to make far more of what the intermediary is doing visible online. And that's what's really interesting. I don't know if we'll probably go in more detail in subsequent questions, but that's fascinating. What's also clear is it's very, at the moment, it's very superficial. You get lots of buttons and sort of little icons saying, you know, online contract, etc. But it's all very clunky if you actually want to try and go through and buy a car or reserve an apartment online. But it's the first, I've seen more developments in the past 4 weeks than in the past 4 years in intermediaries suddenly deciding, I need to make more of what I do doable online.
Okay. And Mostyn, are you seeing the same things?
I think it's really interesting. I'd say we would not have as close a view on the product side as maybe Malcolm or Brian. I think what strikes us at the moment is on all the projects we're working on, it's the same set of questions we've been working on for the previous 18 months. And that people are certainly scrabbling around in the short term for good ideas, good ways of supporting their underlying dealer, agent, advertiser base. But actually what they were thinking about doing, they're doing. If anything, they're actually probably accelerating some projects because they have some capacity, they've got mental space, they've got dev time. And it's probably a reprioritization of some of the big things we've been working on versus just sort of some of the really useful incremental stuff that Malcolm and Brian were talking about. I think that's another way of thinking about it.
Okay, that's a good starting point. Can you dive into that a bit deeper? How are you thinking about this whole rethinking of the businesses?
Well, the two that struck us, obviously, online transactions, that whenever we speak in these forums, always comes up, and we're seeing that very clearly in general goods. So the eBay classified business and various other sort of similar businesses are in the public eye at the moment for various reasons. Certainly the actions though that businesses like that taking to really get into second-hand transactions, say escrow products and photographs and all the good delivery services that sit around that, we've seen that as definitely a direction of travel. I know it's spoken about most maybe in real estate, but actually general goods, we've seen that a lot. And the other one we're seeing a lot of at the moment is, for obvious reasons, various businesses being available a lot cheaper than they were. So some more aggressive businesses in the space looking at taking out competitors or actually sort of actively marketing and trying to drive share of instructions, share of voice, share of love from the agent. So seeing some quite sort of people being proactive and generally trying to take some share from competitors. Again, plans they probably always had, but actually plans they're probably doubling down on now, given everything's available, everything's cheap.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is an acceleration of this. A couple of things. One is aggressiveness in the market because you have to survive, and I think we saw a lot of that in the United Kingdom with Zoopla going after the Rightmove customers on the market, going after the Rightmove. In fact, everyone going after Rightmove's customers. In fact, their customers going after Rightmove itself. Okay, so we're seeing that as an opportunity that's being created. And the other, which I think Malcolm was trying to touch on, was this sort of progressive movement towards, the end-to-end automation of the transaction. And I want to come back to that, Malcolm, because I think that's a very interesting conversation, and I want to make sure we go quite deep on that, because I think there's a lot to learn, a lot to understand around that. What are the 2 or 3 things that you're seeing, Malcolm, that are really innovative in going towards the end-to-end transaction?
Well, depends on the vertical, clearly. And the other interesting dimension is we have to make a distinction between activities being taken by intermediaries versus activities being taken by platforms. And I think that's a really important point. So, you look at a company like Spotter Home, which you could say is halfway between Airbnb and Rightmove, where you can actually view and book your home, your rental home for 6 or 12 months fully online. And it's not so much, it's not like, emails and PDFs. It's more of an end-to-end process. Like, everyone's trying to make that process more like booking a holiday on booking.com. So I think that recognition of individuals wanting to have much more information online, and not just some jazzy video, but really something which you can really get into the nitty-gritty of what every corner of the apartments are like, what the neighborhood's like. This kind of quality of information is something I'm seeing. And I'm seeing it sporadically on other platforms. But Spoil Home is quite a good example of where it's coming together quite nicely. So that's one example. The other interesting one is to what extent you can buy a car online. And what's been happening in the past months is that platforms even like AutoScout have made it that much easier for you to get the car purchased, but it's always through a dealer. AutoScout isn't selling the car. It's not the Amazon experience where the marketplace has the whole payments and transaction execution interface. It's more that the AutoScout is helping that dealer to make the end-to-end transaction work without face-to-face contact. So those are two examples. It's light years away from what we're seeing in China, where you do have full end-to-end e-commerce in automobiles. And I'll be talking about that at one of your next events in more detail. But it's certainly for, again, I think it's quite a lot of innovation in a relatively short amount of time.
Now, Brian, are you seeing the same level of innovation, but going towards the transaction? So and that can be from really two perspectives. One is, we've got, portals saying, okay, how do I get deeper into the transaction, provide more tools and services to streamline the process? Or it might be that the industry itself is saying, I want to automate this even more, so I become more end-to-end self-reliant.
Well, both things are happening. There's an American saying that necessity is the mother of invention. And that is certainly adhered during this moment. There has been more product development more rapidly to accommodate virtual real estate than I have seen in the last decade. Redfin, for example, which is an online real estate brokerage, has moved very, very quickly to facilitate virtual tours, 3D tours, virtual showings, and has seen consumer adoption be very enthusiastic to that. So a lot of product development. But I would say our issue here in the States is really less of a product or technology problem. The technology exists to automate the transaction. We've had electronic signatures for over 15 years. Our problem really is regulatory. So we still require wet or written signatures on many mortgage documents or purchase contracts for a home. We require in-person appraisals of homes. And what's happened during this crisis is those limitations have been temporarily waived. And what we're finding out is that everybody's able to do just fine. Both the portals, the real estate agents, and consumers. Everybody is perfectly happy to have virtual closings, fully digital signings, virtual showings. Everybody's fine with it. So the question now is, after this crisis subsides, will we continue to align our laws and our regulatory system in a way that allows what everybody seems to be quite comfortable with to persist? So yes, lots of tech innovation, but the tech really was largely already there.
Okay. So but you raise a very interesting point that I'd like to explore further. Are we in this sort of abnormal bubble where people have adapted to a new world because we've been locked down, we've had to do everything remotely and electronically, but once the doors open, we go back to normal? I mean, I've seen it here where I am, when they basically unlocked everything and everything's gone back to normal. They've tried the social distancing, but I go to one store and everyone's piled on top of each other. The next store I've got to wear a mask, and it doesn't make sense. Restaurants are full. They tried the tables being a meter or two apart, but suddenly the tables have just drifted back together. Do you think we are inevitably going to go back to the way we were? And this has been a bit of an anomaly, a glimpse into what could be? Or do you think we truly have gone into the next world? Mostyn, I'd love to hear from your thoughts on that.
Oh, nice open-ended question. Purely outside of marketplaces and transactions and portals, there are some industries which consensus is will not go back. So long distance air travel, business air trips for unessential meetings. Some industries will be hit relatively permanently, is the general consensus. And then some industries will be very positively impacted. So Peloton, so do I go to the gym if I can have the gym in my own home? Netflix, do I watch versus go to the cinema? There'll be some obvious industries which have fundamentally changed. In our industries, you can certainly imagine a world in which you're always going to want to see the car, if it's a high value car, the final time before you purchase it. But you might do the first 2 looks online. You might look at the house online twice and only visit 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 versus visiting every single one last time around. So for the edge cases and for some customer segments, I think you'll see a change of behavior. But fundamentally, I guess our starting view would be for a job interview, you want to meet the man or woman face to face before you sign the bit of paper. When looking at the rent or the house, you want to see it and smell it before you sign the bit of paper. So you probably change your behavior pre-transaction, but you probably will want to have some physical interaction at that point of purchase.
Okay. And Malcolm, your thoughts?
As you know, I have a slightly more radical view of how things are going to change. And of course, there are so many different markets we can talk about, so I think we'll agree on some. I think that this accelerated taste of what a superior online transaction-like experience can be, especially in car and real estate, isn't just going to go away. We've also had a huge uptake in people ordering more stuff online, be it food, be it other stuff for the home. And this click to buy dimension, in my view, isn't going to go away. And what I see is a catalyst whereby those, and this is the really interesting question, is it intermediaries or platforms which are able to offer that superior end-to-end experience? Those are, in my view, the ones that are going to thrive. And I think there is so much more that can be done to enable you to get so much further into your transaction online without having to see anything. If you look at the detail of car inspection reports on some of the Chinese platforms, it's tens and tens of pages of ultra high definition photographs, and you can just see quite how far these things can go, and you'll actually learn far more about the car from the online inspection which you get in China than you would from being shown a car by a dealer who's trying to distract your attention to 2 or 3 other things at the same time. So I think we can easily underestimate what will change. Of course, some intermediaries will go back to their old ways, but I think those who will thrive will be those who can embrace a more holistically online experience.
Now, this does raise an interesting question around, and let's just focus on real estate for a moment, because that's the one that is the highest value transaction that's occurring, and one with probably some of the highest number of touch points. In this new world, real estate agents have seen, I think some of them have come to the conclusion that maybe they're not as relevant as they thought they were in a transaction, that consumers are able to actually look at houses, make decisions, and don't need an agent until the last moment, where you actually have to sign a piece of paper, or you need someone to at least help you transact. So the first question is, what does this mean for the future of real estate agents? And let's start with the US. I mean, Brian, you've got billions of them, right? Real estate agents in the US. So what was a lot of them? What does this actually mean to their future?
Well, we have 2 million real estate agents, and we have 300 million people in the United States. So we do have a lot of real estate agents. I think we're headed to a place where we have significantly fewer. I don't think they're going away. A good real estate agent's contribution to the transaction is not administrative, it's intellectual. And that's what a good agent does. It doesn't have to do with opening the door to get somebody in the house or having people sign paperwork. It's guidance and advisory services. So I think agents that do that fine are going to be great. But I do think that we're going to see, in some part due to portals funneling more consumer attention to fewer real estate agents here, you are going to see that number contract. I want to touch on something that Malcolm said. I tend to agree with him. Of course, I don't know. But the idea that we are now in real estate, and it sounds like in car buying too, maybe getting a glimpse at a better way to do it, right? I don't think that can unhappen. So Simon, you go and you sit at a restaurant during COVID and you got to wear a mask and it's all very strange and uncomfortable. That's not a better way. So everybody's eager to go back to the old way. What we're seeing now in real estate is that, wow, I don't have to sit in an office and sign a stack of papers like that. I don't have to have a notary come to my house. I don't have to go through all of this cumbersome logistical stuff just to buy a house. I don't have to do that. Why did we ever do that? And why would anybody ever want to do that again, COVID or no COVID? So I think this has, as Malcolm said, been a catalyst for lasting change. I could be wrong, but I would agree with his hypothesis.
Okay. And Mostyn, from your perspective, you think the volume of agents around the world is going to stay the same, going to decrease, and the same for car dealers at the end of the day, right? They're going to stay the same. These other intermediaries, how do they remain relevant in the transaction?
I think even if you park the previous discussion on online transactions, right now, if we're right, the next 18 months are going to see underlying shrunken markets that we're operating in. And effectively, in quite a lot of markets, there are already oversupply of realtors, oversupply of car dealers in some markets. So there's got to be a shakeout as these people find the next 18 months pretty hard to go by, especially if rents don't get cut and especially if portals don't always change the pricing model. So quite a lot of these businesses, they're going to find the next 18 months pretty challenging. We're already seeing evidence of that in some countries where people are going out of business. So in that situation, the market probably is due for a shakeout. You'll see the people that are the most innovative, the most tech literate, everything else, those will be the people that come out the other end, those that have the right systems, the right marketing, the right team, the right information sets. Those will be the people that come out kicking and screaming on the far end. I think just to the previous comment, I'm sure the panel are both right that we will see changes in behavior. I think if you look over the last 10, 15 years, the rate of change of any of these things has been microscopically small. It could be now that we are really right in the middle of a change in history and suddenly 10% of transactions move online, or 15 or 20. And that would be great for the industry, it'd be great for the consumer. My hunch is still that these changes take a long time to settle into both the industry and the consumer's mind. But the guys are right, this might be different right now. I think history says the changes we're talking about do take not a generation, but they'll take 5 or 10 years to take root in countries, and that will have an impact on for how long some of these mediocre car dealers will be around. I thought.
Now it raises another interesting question. If these markets contract and we are progressively getting less and less agents or car dealers operating, and traditionally the portals of the world have relied on advertising revenue, because a high volume of agents in a fragmented market or a high volume of car dealers in a fragmented market gives you the capacity to create the market. So as that number decreases, it puts economic pressure onto them. What does this mean for the future of these portals, these classified marketplaces? Malcolm, what do you think?
It means they need to either take care of the transaction themselves or to become the back office of to get a larger share of the action of those agents or intermediaries that do survive. And I think what's interesting is we can look at more, what I would call more developed markets. And again, I keep on thinking about China, but there's also some interesting examples in Brazil, where you do see platforms who increasingly are taking center stage in the transaction, and then the brokerages are doing more commission sharing style roles. If they're not bringing a client, then at least they're doing some of that intellectual support, which Brian referred to earlier, or general counseling. So I think I think portals have a fascinating dilemma, right? What's manifestly clear is that the old model is not going to deliver the earnings growth expectations which even current share prices imply. So therefore that means that portals will either have to tap better into the revenue streams which traditionally are going to brokerages, or they will have to do far more of what brokerages are doing and then get brokerages to spend more and then take out more of their costs by relying more on the platforms. So you give an example, you know, a Zoopla is trying to become sort of the digital enablement platform for its brokerages. It's trying to provide much more of the kind of data, systems, back office functions. And so that's one way you can do it. My personal preference is to see platforms actually becoming end-to-end transaction engines. But I agree, it will take time, but there are many steps that can be taken over the next few years to get there.
Brian, you're nodding a lot there. Do you sort of agree with that sort of analysis? Would you want to be the Zillows and Realtor.coms of the world?
Well, I think, and why I'm nodding at what Malcolm is saying is because I think that they have to change, because the model that a portal like Zillow or Realtor.com or Trulia had adhered to for 10, 15 years was wildly inefficient. Tens or hundreds of millions of consumers hitting a website or app that would generate leads that would go out to 100,000 agent advertisers who would on average convert those leads at about 3%, right? I always called it the broken lead machine, wildly inefficient. So what Realtor and Zillow and Trulia have done over the last year is to try and tighten that up. So they qualify the traffic, they send better traffic, better referrals to a smaller user base who converts, and this is anecdotal, but I've talked to agents who work with these portals, are now converting at 10 to 15%, which, you know, is many times better. So yes, I think the portals need to adapt. And in many cases, really, you know, here in the States, the portals are becoming the transaction. They are buying, owning, and selling homes. Those are still nascent businesses. Zillow's business is very young, but they're going after it very aggressively. And that is going to be, that segment of their business is really going to be sort of a test bed for fully automating the end-to-end transaction experience, from self-guided home tours to online transactions rooms, all the way through. So what Zillow does with the homes that it buys and owns and sells will be sort of a look around the corner at what might be adopted more broadly over time.
It does actually raise another question: is that if the outcome is, you know, super efficient transactions, end-to-end technology enabled, you know, everything from electronic signatures through to, you know, lots of online viewings through to, you know, mortgages and finances all tied into this end-to-end process. You can come at it from sort of two angles. You can come at it from the angle of a portal, right? You've got the audience, you've got that, and you basically become a digital platform. Or you can come at it from the angle of a franchise group or an industry player who becomes a very tech-enabled intermediary, but you end up at the same place at the end of the day. Who wins in that game? Who wants to have a crack at that one? Mostyn?
I can have a go. I mean, history says, I'm thinking of Belgium, I'm thinking of the UK, I'm probably thinking of Finland as well, that realtors, dealers, even large recruiters will try and launch their own platforms at any point in time, either because the service they're getting isn't great, the data they're getting isn't great, or even that effectively prices or yields are being squeezed by platforms. And it's the same in price comparison. When you see insurers launching platforms, you see it everywhere. There aren't many examples of those being runaway successes because the portals still have the benefit of customer service. They've got a benefit of years of consumer data, years of pricing data, and obviously they've got the response that's being delivered. So for the car dealer, for the realtor to walk away from the response that's being offered, regardless if it's costly, it's pretty hard yards. So I think what we'll see again, what we saw last recession, what we see this recession, I'm sure, is a shakeout of the worst portals performing badly, but the leaders in the industry really pulling away and investing in, like the guys are saying, investing into proposition, into product. So I I don't think I'm looking at the businesses we work with and seeing the realtors as the risk right now in terms of launching their own competing propositions. Potentially there's some insurgence in some areas, like iBuying as an example, but I don't think we're seeing the underlying market as the threat here.
Okay. Malcolm, your thoughts?
Yes, it really depends where you look as to what you're going to see. I agree with Mostyn. I don't see broker-owned portals doing anything particularly dramatic. The fascinating difference we see today is, this goes back to Brian's point. Classifieds is an incredibly old-fashioned and inefficient business in the sense that it's a lead generation business, right? Whereas increasingly around car, certainly rentals, potentially some real estate purchases, people are looking for a way of getting a transaction done. And there's just, then Mostyn's right, the level of evolution of classifieds platforms getting closer to doing those transactions themselves has been very slow, and I've presented on this at times at some of your conferences. What is fascinating is the quality of platforms that we're now seeing. If you think of like the customer experience ordering a car on Carvana or Kazoo in the UK, renting apartments in Brazil on Quinto Andar, which I think is one of the best examples, in China, a company like Z-Rooms. These are end-to-end transaction platforms. But what their Achilles heel is that they don't have anything like the traffic volumes which the classifieds leaders have. And that gives them very ugly unit economics when it comes to the cost of how much they have to spend to actually get a transaction to occur on their platform. So we have this very interesting contrasting positionings between the best customer experience, certainly from the buyer point of view, versus the platforms which are simply getting all the eyeballs. And I think watching how those two different models play out will be one of the most fascinating things to see over the coming months and years.
Given the two elements, you have traffic, you need eyeballs, you need brand reputation from a consumer perspective on one side, but you need efficient processes to close out a transaction on the other side. And the two have to come together, and you can have a very efficient marketplace at the end of the day. Should a Zoopla buy a Purplebricks, for example, bringing those two together, the traffic elements of the platform on one side and execution on the other? Mostyn, what do you think?
Well, bearing in mind, Axel Springer public domain already have a stake in Purplebricks and is it Home Day in Germany. So they've already 18 months ago went down that strategy of dabbling into ownership of the transaction. The reason whenever you speak to the portals about this, certainly my experience, when you speak to the portals about this, their own customers aren't going to be particularly amused if you're suddenly taking on them directly at their own job. So the reason commission rates in the UK are falling are manifold. One of them is Purplebricks and OpenRent, which are putting direct competition in the market with a much lower unit economic model in terms of cost. So the day I launch a competitor to my customers, I need to be pretty damn confident that I'm going to take a pretty large share of the market quickly. So it might be rational, but you are absolutely biting the hand that feeds you in no uncertain terms. So I think it's not for the faint-hearted.
I have a slightly different view on this, and I definitely, that's obviously the risk, right? To what extent is it the innovator's dilemma? You're killing your core revenue base to find a new revenue base. So of course it's a well-respected position to take. What I would argue is that we're getting, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a platform like Auto Trader UK was just offering dealer cars, right? It was just the platform for dealers. Now they have an extremely competitive offer for individuals to list their own cars on Auto Trader. So 10 years ago, people have said, well, even 5 years ago, they said Auto Trader, it's only going to work for the dealers. It's not going to work on consumers who, therefore, because of their deal with Auto Trader directly, will not necessarily be going straight to the dealers, or individuals will be buying from those consumers rather than going to the dealers. The second model I like is Amazon Marketplace, right, where they can list both a product which is from their own stock and also the stock of alternative vendors. And as long as Amazon brings enough traffic and conversion to those third parties, they're still happy to use Amazon. I think we're going to get somewhere similar. I think we're going to move to own label style brokerages on leading rentals platforms, and certainly on leading sales platforms. But as long as those platforms continue to offer high volume, high quality leads also to their brokerage clients, to their branded brokerage clients, I think that's how it's going to go.
Just like supermarkets at the end of the day.
Like supermarkets, own label versus branded, exactly the same, Simon.
So it's the natural evolution of the industry. I'm interested to hear from the three of you your thoughts about this whole iBuyer model. Now it's clear that Zillow had their traditional advertising business, generating leads, their premium agent, whatever the name is, 10, 15 years of building $1 billion revenue with $1 billion costs, right? Not world's best shareholder, well, probably good shareholder return because the market always seemed enthusiastic of what could be next. But in terms of true value creation, one would argue maybe hasn't delivered the same as a Rightmove, for example, or a Scout 24 or so on. So when they went from that to the iBuyer model, they get a big kick in the share price. Coronavirus comes along, they stop doing the iBuyer model, they get a big kick in the share price, right? You start, you stop. Now they've started again and they've got a kick in the share price. What's happening? So Brian, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I think that investors don't like the idea of owning thousands of homes. I mean, that is a capital intensive proposition. I think, though, basically that Wall Street doesn't quite understand the vision as I understand it. Zillow, in my estimation, doesn't intend to make money by buying a home at X and selling it at Y. Money on real estate brokerage in any event in the United States is really made on fees for mortgage origination, title insurance, homeowners insurance, other services that surround the real estate brokerage transaction. The real estate brokerage transaction in some markets for many brokers has become a loss leader. So, Zillow, and Rich Barton said this when they launched this initiative, what he called the moonshot, is that there are going to be some rocky times ahead for shareholders. But the end goal is to basically capture all of the fees that surround the totality of the purchase and sale and even eventually ownership of a home. So I think it is indeed a moonshot. It's a grand experiment. I don't think the markets quite know what to do with it. It's fun to watch. And it's a huge bet on changing consumer behavior that, I think is probably going to play out pretty favorably, but is yet to be proven one way or the other.
So trying to become the Amazon of the real estate industry, where you literally touch them everywhere.
Yes.
Okay. In all parts of the transaction, and they capture as much of the fee as they possibly can at all parts. Yeah,
and Zillow last year bought a mortgage company, right? So there's an example of a portal, getting deep into the business that traditionally portals left to others, right? They bought a mortgage company. It's in Kansas, I believe, and it's people who do the hard work of processing mortgages. Zillow now owns that company, and it is towards that strategic end of capturing all the revenue that surrounds those hard sort of terrestrial services that portals traditionally didn't touch.
Yeah. Malcolm, what's your view on this whole iBuyer business?
iBuyer is an American phenomenon right now. Often America is ahead of the pack, and what starts in America, the rest of the world. But I'm not sure that that's going to be the case when it comes to iBuyer. I totally agree with Brian. The action is everything around the transaction is very appealing to make money out of. I just don't think you need to own a home in order to make money out of a transaction. I think Zillow's real issue is that they would actually like to become a transaction platform themselves, but can't because, as we discussed earlier, there's that friction or potential friction with brokerages, and the US has some of the largest and best funded and best organized brokerages in the world. So it's a formidable issue to deal with. But I just think eventually they're going to end up running their own style brokerage and getting into the market that way.
Before we've got a bunch of some questions I've got sent to me here. Just before I jump, I just want to show a quick video from the guys from Fortumo, because they do something interesting around how to target the C2C transaction. How do I get the small transaction for advertising, whether it's for cars, whether it's for homes? And I think this whole concept of using mobile payments opens up a whole lot of emerging markets. I actually want to spend a few minutes on emerging markets just after this quick video from the guys at Fortumo. So one of the interesting questions that we get out of this is in established markets where you're dealing with agents, and agents tend to account for the majority of the transactions, it's very easy to operate. When you move to emerging markets, the world is very, very different in terms of small transactions, dealing with potential consumers and so on. What are your thoughts around the difference between emerging markets and developed markets, especially as portals try to get deeper into the transaction, become the Amazon of their markets? Is it much easier to do in an emerging market than it is in the established markets? Who wants to? Malcolm, do you want to have a shot at that one?
Absolutely. So it depends on how strong, there are different factors at play, but clearly a lot of emerging markets stand out in not having well-reputed, well-branded intermediaries like we have in certainly in Western markets. And that obviously creates more of an opportunity for the platform, at least to become the platform of trust. So, the brand of Zameen, which is, let's face it, now part of a unicorn, the brand of Zameen is far, far bigger than any brokerage brand in Pakistan. So knowing that the listing has come from Zameen, or what's most of their business, that the apartment is a new build is being sold by Zameen, means far more to an individual than what they would learn about a particular brokerage. So I think in emerging markets, platforms have far more brand power and far greater ability to take center stage in ensuring transactions happen. The downside is that often the infrastructure around getting them to happen is often more complex to put in place. But I don't think there is anything like the same tension with intermediaries as we have in Western markets, and the ability to work in a commission sharing or even a sort of an Uber style relationship with the platform, giving gigs to self-employed brokers, is far more likely to be happening in a lot of emerging markets.
And Mostyn, are you dealing with emerging markets? And if so, are you seeing similar sort of trends or opportunities?
Nowhere near as much as probably others on the phone. I mean, 90% of what we do will be US, Europe, Northern Southern Europe. So I don't personally have a perspective on that one that's useful.
Okay, so I agree with Malcolm what he's talking about there, because I've got a bunch of investments in these markets, and what I find is very interesting is that the main players, the portals are less portals and far more platform providers anyway today. And they're being able to create these digital moats or brand moats around their businesses. There's Zameen's a good example. You can go to Myanmar, you can go to Cambodia, you can get a whole bunch of places where companies are really investing and saying, we are far more than a place to look for real estate and generate a lead. And I think they are the ones where there is the most opportunity and perhaps the easiest opportunity to roll out these end-to-end digitization platforms, because once it's done for a complete industry. In fact, it can be done for a complete country. And then, you know, and I'm involved with a number of companies around the world where they're really pushing towards this Uberization of the agencies, whereas as Malcolm was talking about, you're an agent, you have an app for, you know, a portal, you can have an app for your broker, and wherever the lead comes from, you don't care. Your job is to close out the deal and you'll get to your percentage of the commission. And there are a bunch of players out there who are very much saying, let's change the way in which we really do real estate in those markets. And I think they're the ones who are best positioned, and they're the ones who will, I think, end up capturing a greatest chunk of value, but unfortunately it's in relatively low value markets compared to, say, the US or the UK or Australia. The last question, actually, there is a question that's come in here specifically for you, Mostyn. It's, is there any advice you can give on how portals should wind back the COVID discounts or rate relief that they're given? How do you get out of this? Having gotten into it, you know, everyone rushes to the door, here's the money, here's the discount, you know, etc. How do you take those steps back in such a way that you can not screw your business?
Yeah, I think certainly lessons from other industries are probably just as useful here. So where we've seen it outside purely of portals, it's about trying to strike a longer term relationship or longer term deal with your client. So in leisure, in retail, it's about extending leases in return for favorable payment terms over the next 6, 9, 12 months. So to try and take a partnership-led approach to coming out of this together based on a series of metrics versus just aggressively unwinding a discount based on something is something that we're seeing outside of purely platforms. The second one is to do something like the governments always do. So have five tests. So when we see the following things, we will start to talk to you about unwinding this together, but make it more transparent so people can understand what to expect and price it into their own thinking, as opposed to sort of having it hit them binarily over the first phone call. So combination of long-term pricing thinking plus transparency on how you're thinking about it, so what they can expect, are probably two initial thoughts on it.
Okay, and I would
people
think
don't like shocks.
No, people don't like shocks. They didn't like the external shock. They probably appreciated for a short time the gift that the portal gave. It's now gone from a gift to expected, I would think, in many ways, and then it's now now unwinding it. So how do portals ensure that this doesn't become a long-term impact? I mean, they gave the gift for 3 months, but it's now taking 3 years to get back to where you were.
So if I just follow from the previous conversation, 2021 will probably be a smaller market in terms of real estate transactions, auto transactions, job filling than 19, but it will be a market returning to growth. So as long as the customers understand that you are aware of their circumstances, your understanding of the industry that they're in, and in 6 months' time, if you've seen the market return to growth, you'll be having a different conversations than you're having now. I think just the experience of where this has gone badly this time around and last time around has been where the communication was badly managed or the expectations were badly set. But as soon as you can point to green shoots in the underlying industries, people are more, I suspect, will be more prepared to have a rational conversation, as long as it's signposted.
Okay.
And if others have a different view on that.
So I would add that some of it's quite psychological, I think, building on Mostyn's point. So I think the justification to move back to full pricing, I think, is there once lockdowns end and clearly the traffic is up. And remember that even if you look at the right moves of this world, the share of the agent's profit that they're actually pocketing is still, in my view, relatively small compared to the value they bring. So I think that the pricing power is still there, especially in markets where you have one clear leader.
Okay. One last question has come in before we wrap it up. And this is coming from Canada, actually, from Simon Bray. It says, prior to the crisis, we were seeing a lower home ownership rate in younger generations. Are you seeing any evidence of consumer behavioral beliefs changing with respect to real estate, just fundamentally changing the underlying premise? Do you expect a greater emphasis on a home experience over, over having a house? Do you think that people will, be looking for different characteristics in their home? An office, for example, with Zoom connected in at the side, and so on. And do you think that the younger generations will view home ownership differently? And could this fundamentally change the way we see the whole industry actually operates anyway? Brian, what do you think? You must be seeing some of this in the US.
Yeah, the short answer on the question of younger generations and their perception of home ownership is no. We have seen no evidence that younger people value home ownership any less in the States. They still desire it, as did previous generations. The theory around that has emerged in the last couple of years is that millennials are part of this, what we call the subscription economy, where we own nothing and rent or subscribe to everything. And we were, I think, erroneously applying that thinking to home ownership. It hasn't proven out. Zillow and the National Association of Realtors have done lots of research with millennials, and their expressed desire to own a home is as strong as it was for any other generation. The home ownership rate in the States declined significantly due to first the housing crash of 2008, and then the constriction of mortgage underwriting standards that came in reaction to that. So that was not a consumer attitude shift. That was simply a macroeconomic function. So that's what we're seeing here in the States. No evidence of people wanting to ditch home ownership. We're seeing, changed desires already in terms of search patterns. People are looking, outside of cities. Those who live in first ring suburbs are looking to buy acreage out beyond the suburbs. So we'll see how that plays out.
And I was reading about the exodus from New York. People just don't want to live there at the moment. One doesn't know whether that's a temporary or potentially more permanent outcome. And I think the other thing we have to also take into account, that goes back to one of the very first points that Mostyn made, was that the economic impact we haven't really felt yet. There's been, if you think most countries, at least in the first world, have had massive amounts of government stimulus pumped into them to artificially keep things relatively buoyant. But it's impossible for that to continue. And when you're sitting in the US on, was it 14% unemployment or some crazy number? You're going to have a lot of, I think, longer term issues there for people thinking about home ownership, because it will literally just be a dream. It won't be, because who's going to give you money? You don't have a job. So I think there's going to be some very challenging issues around this. Thank you very much, everyone, for spending the hour chatting around, what the post-coronavirus world looks like. As we continue to move through this process, I'm sure we'll get clearer. Eventually we'll get there at some point in time, and we'll have greater transparency into what is happening. It's been a fantastic conversation. So thank you very much for sharing time, Malcolm, Brian, and Mostyn. Thank you very much. I think without you guys and your great thoughts, these panels just don't work. I've got to thank Iavox and Fortumo for their sponsorship. So thank you very much to you guys. And I hope the panelists enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the chat, the conversation around these various issues. And we're getting some good thanks from the guys on the chat, who clearly picked up some ideas, some thoughts, and some ways to think about the future of their businesses. So thank you very much. I hope everyone has a great day, and wherever you are in the world. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.